Mythology is like art. It seems to express the things that words fail to express. It symbolizes things that are so deeply innate within the human psychology that verbal utterances oftentimes just fall short of, and even thought will dilute. In other words, mythology is the manifestation of the human psyche, just as is art. And much like art, mythology is supposed to be experienced. It's supposed to be felt. It is supposed to be a phenomenon of the human core. It is not to be idealized. It is not to be studied. It's not to be dissected. It is a thing that is like love. It is a thing that is like excitement. It is a thing that is like ambition. It is something that if you try to set back and analyze it, it loses all of its inherent value. And within polytheism, very specifically the Celtic, the Nordic, the Proto-Germanic, the Greek mythologies, the polytheistic belief system, in other words, they knew the quality of experience. They knew the importance of the immediate experience, and they knew how profound it was to completely give oneself over to the experience in its totality. And it was perhaps the Greeks more so than anybody that understood the quality of giving in or succumbing to the overall experience. And nothing represents this more than their god Dionysus, who is the god of wine, who is the god of the vineyard, who is the god of the vine, who is the god of drunkenness, madness, and frenzy. Albeit, whenever we hear a god of madness or frenzy like Dionysus or like Odin from the Nordic mythologies, we oftentimes think of it in terms of lunacy, of somebody who has become unhinged, who has lost their mind, so to speak. But to the ancient world, this was not the case. Madness and frenzy simply meant giving into the experience. That is why we see the god Odin oftentimes associated with battle and war, because they would fully submerge themselves into that experience, be it good or bad, vile or evil. In the Greek with the Dionysus, we see that the aspects of Dionysus is oftentimes associated with festivities and celebrations and parties, and that means giving oneself over to that immediate experience. And that is why they are both also linked with shamanic experiences, extra-psychical phenomenon, and of course, creativity, art, music, poetry, so on and so forth. Yet with the stigmas aside, we can simply ask one very unique question. Was Dionysus good or was Dionysus bad? Because in reading the various mythologies, the Romans oftentimes put a negative stigma or association with him, but the Greeks held him as a very beautified figure. So what was he? Well, the reality is he was neither. Dionysus in his Greek form, not his Roman form, in his Greek form, represented duality. And duality is more closely akin to reality. It is exempt from idealism. Ideals tell us what things ought to be, not what things actually are. The Greeks understood how things actually were, and that a thing could be both good and bad, and that a god that could work good would also cause bad, and a god that would work bad could also cause good, and that all things existed beyond good and evil. Everything had a duality to it. Everything, in essence, existed in a form of gray. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, understood this duality perhaps better than anybody else, and he considered himself the last disciple of Dionysus and the last living philosopher of the Dionysian experience. And for Friedrich Nietzsche, Dionysus seemed to represent the totality of the human experience. He represented the animalistic, primordial, primal instinct that we all hold within ourselves, and where it meshes with higher thought, with creativity, with intellect and genius. So for Nietzsche, it seemed to be the convergence of our animal nature, that which connects us to the reality of the trees, the birds, and every other species on this planet, but also what separates us from it. It was the pure and totality of the human experience. It was the ultimate will to life. Now then, being that Dionysus was the god of wine and drunkenness, we can start to see how this all starts to unfold. It is because alcohol in and of itself is dualistic. Take, for instance, our modern world. We have very much divided ideas on what alcohol is and should be in a person's life. We have people who are absolute teetotalers who wouldn't touch a drink of alcohol to save their life. And then we have other people who can't go out on the weekend without getting absolutely shit-faced. But not only that, but we also have a duality or a split, a division, in other words, within the scientific community, where we can't necessarily agree, is alcohol good? Does it have benefits, or is it bad and completely a toxicity to the human body? The reality is that alcohol, like Dionysus, is both. It is a dualistic aspect. In our modern world, we oftentimes try to simplify things. We try to dumb things down to where they fit into a category that is easy to say, this is black, this is white, this is good, this is bad. And alcohol nowadays has been nicknamed the pharmacological hand grenade. And like a hand grenade, it can do good things. It could blow up an enemy tank or however you want to portray the metaphor, but there's always collateral damage as well. So yes, it does have good, but it also has bad. So we can't ever say necessarily that it is good or that it is bad. But for the remainder of this video, I'm going to clarify that biologically speaking, alcohol is bad. It's not good for your kidneys. It's not good for your liver. I am not condoning alcoholism in any way, shape, or form. But from a creative standpoint, we can attest to the fact, scientifically and statistically speaking, that alcohol does have benefits for the human psychology. How alcohol is good for the human psychology is that it represses the functions of the prefrontal cortex. This might sound a little bit scary, but this allows for some beautiful experiences. It allows one to not be reserved. The prefrontal cortex is what is in charge of our social conservatism. In other words, it allows one to give oneself more fully to the experience. It allows for more emotional fluidity, and it reduces one's social anxiety. It reduces one's lies also, because fundamentally humans lie. We lie to ourselves, we lie to others. We put up a pretense or a persona that we wish the other people to perceive us as. And that is all rooted within the prefrontal cortex. So with the reduction of the function of the prefrontal cortex, it reduces our ability or capacity to lie. So we are giving ourselves more truly and fully to the people around us, and we're also receiving other people who are also inebriated in their more true form as well. Furthermore, I find it more interesting that it seems to blur the lines between emotion and thought, to where you can seemingly feel your thoughts more intimately, and you can think your feelings more realistically. It is the perfect mixture of cognitive and emotional abilities, and that of course is why we see alcohol linked to creativity. For eons, it has been a cliche that artists and poets, geniuses, creators, inventors, philosophers, great thinkers, scientists have a predisposition to alcoholism. They are a little bit more akin to substance abuse. Well, statistically, this has been proven correct. This is not just a cliche, but scientifically, we're now seeing that the repression of the prefrontal cortex allows for more emotional fluidity. It allows for more natural occurrence and random thoughts to occur in one's head. It allows for more spontaneity, and spontaneity is where creativity genuinely comes from. Furthermore, studies done in Washington have also proven that the repression of the prefrontal cortex, especially with the blood alcohol content or the BAC of around 0.08%, it seems to be where the motor functions are a little bit reduced, where you shouldn't be driving or operating heavy equipment, but you still have the cognitive functions enough to link them with your emotions, and that it seems to be where the most creative aspects seem to flourish or come into existence. And that is also where we're most socially acceptable with other people. It seems to be a reduction of the ego, to where we're not butting heads with other egos and we're not meeting other egos, but instead it seems to be the perfect balance where we're actually meeting genuinely on a real connection with other personalities. Our personality chemically meeting with another personality. But these studies were done by giving some folks a placebo drink and other folks an actual drink. And as we might have expected, the alcohol actually inebriated the people more. It wasn't just psychological. It was actually a biological, pharmacological effect that it had on the human body. And this seemed to be more conducive to constructive thoughts and intuitive insights into oneself and to the people around them. But as anybody who's ever been inebriated via alcohol or psychedelics or anything of that nature, one can attest to the fact that it is very much conducive to living in the moment. It is very much allowing one to be swept up with the immediate experience, and you become frenzied in that time frame. You're truly living in the present. When one is inebriated, one's not thinking about tomorrow. You're not worried about your bills. In fact, that's why a lot of us do drink, unfortunately, is to forget about the worries of the future, to not be dredged back by the past, but to be absolutely and fully in the moment. That is why alcohol is so utilized in social functions like parties and so forth. And that is why Dionysus, of all the gods, is associated with festivities, with celebrations, with feasts and so on and so forth. Because ultimately what Dionysus represents is not just drunkenness, but he represents simply being caught up in the moment, submitting to the immediate experience and being captivated by the here and the now. Dionysus is all about, simply speaking, living in the moment.